Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Successful Skills Unwrapped webinar. Today we have Shawna Bell, and we're going to be talking about creativity, collaboration, and community. So I just want to do a brief introduction of Shawna because I think it's important to do. Shawna has over 25 years of experience working in community engagement and fundraising. She accepted her role as executive director for the Christmas Cheer Board in 2021. There's lots going on that year. It was an easy offer to accept when presented to her 3 years ago. Having been a volunteer for many years and past board chair, this organization has always meant a lot to me. And as a young child, I spent time shopping and picking out gifts with my parents. I've also organized hampers and collections when I went out into the world of work. It's important to me. And so I'm just really excited today. We're going to have a free flow conversation regarding the concept of creativity, collaboration, and community. And just a friendly reminder that throughout this presentation, or it's going to be a conversation, you can always ask questions in the chat box and we will address them as we go along or at the end. So please don't wait. We'll be able to chime right in and answer your questions. Shawna, anything you'd like to start with or anything that comes to mind?
Nothing comes to mind, Donna. Just thank you so much for having me today. This is a really great opportunity to come and talk about collaborating and creativity in this community, and it's a great community.
It is a great community. I always think about it, and I took my son out a couple years ago to deliver a hamper, and it was interesting for him to have that experience. Does that make sense? That opportunity to collaborate and connect with the community in a different way.
When you bring them in, when the kids come in young, it really is something that they are attracted to. It's exciting, and there's so much activity going on, and a real great opportunity to get them connected to what we do and just the greater Winnipeg area overall.
Yeah, it's one of those things we talk about. We think about community, and we're here today to look at, the connection between these topics and the idea of not-for-profits. And it is something to think about is how do we start to engage, how do we start collaborating with the youth to get them involved, to want to show them that they have a place in the space of creating the community that they want. What are some things or initiatives that your organization has done in that arena?
We're pretty open to a lot of suggestions that come forward. Some of the ones that we've done traditionally have been, we do a lot of group hamper packing. So once we're set up in the warehouse, we bring in school children, businesses, sports teams, a lot of those youth sports teams, and they come in and they pack hampers, and it ends up being a half-day experience, which is exceptionally wonderful for them. We've got a lot of organizations, especially youth group sports, that will come and deliver hampers for us. So, and that ends up being, those opportunities bring them sort of a little bit, they introduce them to who we are, and then it helps, they get really excited about it, and that cascades over to their parents and makes it a family event.
Yeah, well, what one of the things that I hear you saying, and from your example, that's a takeaway for me, is that when we want to bring in groups of people like to come together. It's not just a one-off often. It's like, let's get together with my friends. So that idea of how do we bring people in so that they're with their colleagues, they're stretching themselves because, and then they're learning to, we start talking about collaborating, they're learning how to talk and communicate with the volunteers, potentially your clients as well, right? So I do always like to think about that, because for the not-for-profits, how do we get the youth involved? How do we get that youth involved in the work? How do we get them to feel there's a spot for them there?
And a lot of times what I find to be really important, it's coming to them and giving them a little bit of an insight into the organization is great. But when you can actually bring them in and expose them to how the organization functions, it tends to mean more, because it's that connection.
Yeah.
Right away, they're identifying and they can see it right before them. So it really does engage them a lot more.
Yeah, for sure. And so it's that, and then also that component of, how do we make this also fun? It's work. It's not easy to come and volunteer. It's like when I make sandwiches places, right? It's not easy, but it's often fun. That's what I walk away with. So it is just that thing for those that are kind of part of what we're doing today, is just thinking about how do we bring in groups of people within our organizations? How do we make them feel welcome? Because that's a large part of collaboration. It's about inclusivity for others.
That's right.
It's collaborating
Yeah.
with many, not just people like ourselves.
Well, in an organization like the Cheer Board, every year we see new volunteers cross the threshold and come to us, and which is fantastic because we see new faces, and
Hmm.
new faces bring forward new ideas. And we want to make sure that those folks feel comfortable because volunteerism is a challenge
Yes.
for a lot of organizations. But if you can help folks to feel comfortable in the setting and make them realize that, their impact, the fact that they crossed the threshold and came through that doorway
Hmm.
makes a difference no matter
Yes.
what they're doing, then it creates that connection with individuals and the spaces that they come forward in. So, I
Yeah.
think that happens not just in charitable organizations, but also in the regular workplace as well.
Yeah. It's also, there's a question I'm going to bring up, but it's also, we think about those things for volunteers, but those things we all talked about there are the same concepts of what could be connected to even employing and recruiting, right? You know what I mean? Like, what about having an open house? What about bringing people in? So they're not making a commitment, but they're being that creative way to actually find employees, finding that creativity and innovation that we're talking about.
Absolutely, and just that welcome environment. People, the I always find that the biggest challenges is that people are unsure, uncertain of what they're stepping into. But when
Yes.
you create a welcoming environment for them, it makes it that much easier, and there's so much more ease for folks as they're coming into the work site. So
Yeah.
anything you can do to make them feel better about that is fantastic.
Yeah, it is. Here's a question. So, where the topic is here, how to create the best space for these ideas to thrive within your organization. So, these, I'll leave that with you.
To me, it's about not just being open and available. It's the idea of being approachable and flexible with how you do things. I know that when I first came on board with this organization back in 2021, we were in the midst of a pandemic and had to really change the way we function and the way we were able to help folks. So that didn't happen without a lot of feedback from not just the volunteers, but from some of our recipients as well, to really get us on the right path forward. And then being able to adapt some of that going forward beyond the pandemic and make it work so that we could reset and bring food back to the environment, but also be able to help people in similar ways. You gotta be able to sort of adapt as you go, really.
So, when people use that word approachable, can you describe what that actually is? Because it's a word we hear, but could you give a little bit more, because the approachability does really connect to the creativity and innovation, right?
It really does. I think that when people come into our workplace, and it is a workplace, just like any other organization, but I think it's introducing ourselves as being, the folks who you can come to and talk to about any of the issues that are going on. I am the one full-time employee with the Christmas Cheer Board year round.
Yes.
However, I do bring on another 6 people that come and help out, and then we've got our core team of volunteers as well. So having folks come in for the first time and recognizing that they have people that they can connect with right off the hop, whether it be myself or one of our other team members, and just knowing that their feedback, their thoughts on things are very important to how we continue to conduct ourselves. And it's adjustments as we go forward. So, to me, there's no new point of view that isn't worth exploring a little further and understanding how we can adapt it to our environment.
It's that concept, of adjustments.
Yep.
It's not about it. Does that seems like it's those small little choices we make?
Mm-hmm. Well, this organization has been around for 105 years, but if we were to do things the way we did them 105 years ago, we
Yeah.
wouldn't be doing them for much longer. So it's really
No.
adaptability for sure.
Yeah, and people talk about being adaptable, and often and we think about it from a skills for success perspective, is that idea of adaptability, but they're adaptable if it fits in their space. And so I'm sure over the time, I'm always curious to know how we're bringing in technology and how we're using it to improve the opportunity of work,
Mm-hmm.
the experience of work, but also the opportunity of how it improves the client experience. Is it okay if I use the word client?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So thinking about that, how have you adapted technology to just enhance the experience for people?
Well, I will tell you that back in 2021, when I first came on board with the organization, we were still
Yeah.
writing on triplicate paper. So
I'm sorry.
yeah, we've come a long way in the last over the course of the first year. We
Yeah.
developed an online database that really was going to help. We still take applications by phone, and that's uh, because by necessity,
And
really.
not everybody has technology.
Not everyone has technology, and also, to be honest with you, it's an overwhelming number of people that need our help every
Yeah.
year, and they want to get in as fast as they can. So it can be a little bit of it can overwhelm the best technology, in a good day.
Yeah.
But what we did do was take the online opportunity and help our folks expedite those applications. So it's a faster process because everything's entered in online. It's a secure database that we work with, and
Yeah.
we're able to actually bring that information out onto our floor, onto our warehouse floor in a
Yeah.
seamless manner as well. So we're not quite bleeding edge, but I'd say we've definitely made a lot of steps forward to make ourselves a lot more tech savvy.
So what role do you think technology kind of plays in the future of work?
From our perspective, it's the customer service aspect that I think is
Okay.
really helping. It does, of course, require folks to be a little bit more comfortable in that environment,
Yeah.
which has happened over the course of a couple of years. Our typical volunteers are in their later 60s and up, and so introducing technology that they may not be comfortable with has been something that we've had to sort of adjust to. But I
Yeah.
think overall, what that does is help everybody just have that much better of a process. From the moment a client steps in our doors to pick up their hamper, it's a faster process than it's ever been, and less errors. So, we're really working to make sure that the client experience it's a good one. It's a strong one.
So when you think about this concept of like collaboration and creativity and innovation,
Mhm.
you're focusing more on, if we were going to invest those resources and time, it'd be more on that client experience versus an internal for your, it's really about that client experience as your number one.
Number one is the client experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Those are those are our people. Those are who we serve. And it's essential that we're doing the right thing for them.
Yeah.
Um, at the back end of it, and not to diminish our volunteers, but certainly it's working with them to help them keep up to speed. But our clients are our primary focus.
How do you think, you said if you're the primary full-time employee and you bring on other people, how do you create that culture of creativity and collaboration? Like what is it that you think you do or your organization does?
This organization has always been an organization that's very approachable to people coming on board with us,
Yeah.
and sharing ideas. So with our team, even though I don't see the majority of them for the better part of the year, we do a lot of check-ins throughout the year just to make
Okay.
sure everybody's okay with coming back. Do they have any thoughts? Prior to our AGM in June, I meet with our core team and just go through sort of the year that was, see if there's anything that they have to add to how I think it went. And
Yeah.
then also looking at the year that's to come and some of the changes that, in consultation with our board of directors, that we've decided to implement this year, and just make sure that that's a comfortable space for our core team, and that they can also cascade that down to the other volunteer, the real key volunteer members, and make sure everybody's on the same page. So it's an opportunity for a lot of feedback, and
Mhm.
just being able to see where we go. There have been so many times where someone has mentioned an idea that has come to fruition. Last year we had some fantastic initiatives that we worked with through workplace health and safety, and they were things that we hadn't really done in the past, but just having somebody flip the switch and look at it from a different perspective really opened our eyes to what we needed to do to help ensure the safety of our team.
It is an interesting thing because we talk about how, like we talk about the importance of building those connection points with people, right? You know what I mean? So even though you're not seeing somebody, doing those touch points is, it doesn't sound like rocket science. That's what my old boss used to say. Don, what we do isn't rocket science,
Right.
and yet we don't do it very often.
Well, I think that's the idea. Is sometimes things don't have to be so complicated.
Yeah.
They can just be as simple as reaching out and connecting with your team.
Yeah.
And when your team feels like they're engaged, they are a lot more comfortable with speaking, with offering up, their opinions
Yeah.
and their perspectives on what can help make things better overall.
So you talk about what you do there nonchalant. But I know it's more difficult than that, to be able to actually trickle that culture down over short periods of time, even though people are coming back. If there's one or two ideas that you could share with somebody who maybe brings volunteers in, once a year, they have to,
Mhm.
they have a huge influx of people. What are
Yeah.
some things you would do there to create that community that you're doing?
I think the one key thing that I've seen over the last 3 years is training, making sure that not only do people have the ability and access to training before
Yeah.
they come on site, but that they're very aware of what they're committing to
Mm-hmm.
beforehand.
Yes.
Because once you give them the tools to be able to do the job, then they can fly with it. And it requires minimal supervision on that because you've trained them up properly. But that to me has been the biggest thing that I've seen over the last few years, and we continue to improve on that
Yeah.
internally as well. I don't
Yeah.
think it's ever perfect, and also technology also helps improve things as we go year to year. So that would be the key piece that I think. And then again, just that welcoming atmosphere. People always are very comfortable once you've created a space for them.
Mm-hmm.
And inclusion is a huge thing for us. Despite the fact that we're called the Christmas Cheer Board and have been for the last 105 years, it's important to our organization that everyone feels that they can come to us, whether they need support or whether they actually want to help. Um, the inclusivity of this organization is key to really helping volunteers. Well, I think that's important to any workspace is inclusion. People need to feel that they have a place there.
Yeah. And what I also add, would it be okay for me to say also a voice,
Yes. Yep.
a place and a
Absolutely.
voice? Yeah. Like it really is quite a fascinating thing, the importance of, like, when I walk in, do people know I'm here?
That's
When I
right.
come to any space, do they know I'm here? Does somebody appreciate that I've actually showed up?
Yes.
And if I walk in, and does somebody sort of remember something? You don't have to remember. Do they remember something that we've talked about, right? So we start talking about this idea of collaborating when those simple yet challenging pieces are there for things. It's
Mhm.
fascinating how it kind of trickles down, right?
People really enjoy feeling that sense of connection, and when they can speak their mind or let you know a thought that has come to them, it's
Yeah.
really important. And I think validating people is essential.
Yeah, it is. I always appreciate when someone says, like, "I'm glad you came today." Does that
Yeah.
make sense? It's like I go to in the morning, the gym, and the person's like, "Glad you're here. See you again next time." I'm like, "Wow, I really appreciate that." Um,
It
and
makes
that
you want
is
to come
the
back.
environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suspect that's what
That's
you're
right.
talking about. Just a question here on collaboration. So when collaboration is tough, I know you said no challenge. No challenge I cannot take on, is what you said
Yeah.
in your before. But when your collaboration is tough, right? So when you're collaborating stuff, how do you move forward? So as in your leadership role, how do you move forward in those times?
I have a great example. It was a couple of years ago. We introduced workplaces coming in and helping out on site in
Yeah.
the warehouse. And that was a big pushback from our core team because in the past, we'd always just brought school children in, which is fantastic. But school children um, aren't don't necessarily carry our message forward all the time, and we need to. I firmly believe that you got to speak to the mountaintops every time you want to
Yeah.
make yourself heard. So we started bringing in workplaces, and I know that a few of our team were very disappointed about that. But when I explained to them that it wasn't about limiting the kids, it was just about trying to expand it and help others know who we were within the community, and that we were an approachable space to come and work with, then it made a lot more difference because they understood the why.
Hmm.
And all of those collaborations, anytime that you're looking and working within a team, people have to understand why you're doing what you're doing.
Hmm.
And you can't, no one's just going to follow you blindly into this. So it's really important not just to tell them the why, but hope that they can see the line that connects the dots to really get that buy-in. And so that's sort of that difficulty with collaborating sometimes. It comes from a good place, but it's really just about helping them get to where you want to be, I think, and recognizing that sometimes not everything works. So you might have to go back and retool it. And if you do, that's okay. It doesn't mean there was a failure there, because you'll learn from what didn't succeed. So.
Right. And they often, maybe most people say we learn just as much from, well, that didn't work this time, so what could we do differently, right?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. It is an interesting mindset, though, to just that willingness to even explain your why. So when you think about collaborating and you think about a time where your initial why changed,
Mm-hmm.
You started off with something and then your own mind changed. Like, what, something to share with that others could take away?
I think one of the big areas that we have been working on over the past few years was just the change in nutritional contents of the hampers.
Oh.
And looking at that a couple of years ago and seeing some feedback on having more grains and legumes in a lot of different protein alternatives in our hampers. And so we tried that for a couple of years, and we were also soliciting feedback from the hamper recipients on what they liked and what they didn't like. And after 2 years of hearing they didn't like the grains and they didn't like the legumes, we've gone and retooled our hamper contents again to better address their needs. And just, from a cultural background too, what is it that, folks are really, what are they missing that we should be supplying? So those, none of what we do happens without having to sort of take a long lens back at it and see where the successes were and where the rework needs to happen.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because it's definitely a mindset and an approach, right? And then having to step back. So for organizations and not-for-profits, like, what are some things regarding using data? You must use a lot of data. You gather a lot of data, confidential data that you keep. Like, what's some thoughts on that and collaboration and creativity?
We really have worked a lot on security over the last few years, and that's an essential part of any nonprofit, and how they have to adapt. Even over the last couple of years, what's come into play big time is just the insurance for cyber defense, and understanding that that's a necessity. It's not a nice to have, it's an absolute necessity going forward. There's too much vulnerability out there with client data, and so there's a protection of that every nonprofit is absolutely responsible for, including us. So that was a lot of conversations happening at the board level to ensure we were comfortable with what we were collecting, but also how we were securing it. And so we worked with the organization that's developed our database to make sure that how it exists is only visible to individuals. It's only visible to us, as a matter of fact, during the season, and then that goes into a lockdown state, and we refresh it every year. And I think I know that can't happen for a lot of organizations because their clients are recurring, and our clients are recurring also. But just for the safety of them, we have chosen to refresh that database year over year. So that's we take what we need to out of it. We extrapolate for the data that helps us better understand our clients, but then it's sunsetted for the year. And I think that just creates a better, safe environment for our clients. And I can't speak to what other nonprofits are doing with that data, because it's a challenge right now. There's such a vulnerability out there that I think everybody has to work with.
Yeah, that's I can visualize that there must be some interesting conversations about whether or not to refresh, or are we being client-centric by asking them to have to re-sign up. I'm sure those conversations were plentiful and pretty in-depth, because that's an interesting concept, right?
As anyone can attest to right now, just the sheer amount of cyber phishing that goes on, and it almost makes it impossible to get through the workday without having some random email come through your system. And so the better that you're equipped to look after those, and you educate your staff, anyone who's answering those emails, what they shouldn't touch, what they should touch, those are huge pieces.
And so where do you and your board sort of sit? Where do you and your board, like when you're not just your board, but in general, and you've been in this arena, in this space, but when you're working with a board or partners where you need to kind of come to decisions together, what are some techniques for getting them on board with a future that they yet can't visualize? Like you've got a vision, usually an executive director has a very good vision, but now you got to get your board on. Like what are some techniques that you've tried here and other places?
When I think about with the cheer board and our board of directors, they've been pretty open to a lot, but sometimes there is some pushback. And
Yeah.
so it's really helping, again, understand why we're making this change
Yeah.
and what has brought this necessity to change forward. We have never been an organization that's been very visible up until a couple of years ago anyway, really media-wise or social media-wise. So there wasn't a lot of resistance on us taking that next step forward to be more visible and more active online.
Yeah.
But it's those pieces, depending on who you have on your board too. I think if everybody sort of has bought in to what your mandate is, and you have the support as a director, if you have the support of the board, it makes it a whole lot easier to implement those changes. But really, when the data is being pulled at the end of the year and we have a chance to learn and understand our clients a little bit better, it helps our board sort of see that next step that has to be taken and why. For a great example was just over the last couple of years with the Ukrainian population and just the surge that we saw. We've seen, I think we've taken over 6,000 applications from Ukrainian families over the last 2 years, and just helping adapt and be able to be more accessible to them because they are such a large group that came in all at once. And so it was putting a lot of services in place that would help the Ukrainian families. There's language barriers with them. And so really helping, bringing in some Ukrainian speaking call takers to be able to understand that and also process them on the back end, because we worked with the Ukrainian Federation as well to process a lot of those mass applications. So that was something that our board had to really get behind because it required a significant amount of human power to make that work. So, once you see the numbers, though, it's hard to dispute the reason why.
I suspect this in your organization, and when organizations see that there's going to be a greater need for things, how does that change? Like when you see that there's going to be a surge for your services, and every not-for-profit goes through, right, different times. As a leader, like when you see there's going to be a potential increase for your services, what are some things that you start thinking about differently?
Well, again, the last few years have been exceptional learning years because there has been so much change brought about by the pandemic. So one of the big things we knew coming through, just anything that you were seeing, whether it be in media or print, was all about just the surge in pricing and inflation. And so it was taking a look at that and really assessing what that was going to mean to us. What I did the first year after the pandemic was we projected about a 10 to 12% increase in hamper applications coming through. That again was just understanding the environment that we were working with. And then again, even last year, with the identification of just inflation being such an impact on families, and knowing that there were going to be folks who'd never used our services in the past who would be coming to us. We again really projected an increase of another 15%. Now that on its own wasn't even enough to where we settled last year. So that was a learning that I took away was, we have to be pretty agile is such an overused statement, but you really have to make sure that you're if you're going to open the door to help, then you got to be able to help whoever needs that help. And then that was a challenge for us. We did not meet that challenge last year, unfortunately. But it's taking that learning and knowing that this year we can't be in the same position we were at the end of the season last year. We have to be better.
So I suspect there's things that you have put into place to manage that.
Yep.
But what do you do when you're going through again and maybe you find that, there's a greater demand than you expected? Like what do you do with your teams at that time, right? That's really what that collaboration is. Like collaboration
Right.
to me isn't about just getting together and planning a party. Collaboration
No.
to me is about getting together when there's a little bit of a rub. That's what I call it, a little bit of a rub. Not a problem, but a rub.
Yep.
And so what are some things that you like, that thinking that goes on? Because I think that's what people like to learn from, like the thinking.
We have our weekly checkpoints. So
Right.
once a week, our group meets and just understands where we're at with our applications, as well as any other concerns that are coming through from our various areas.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start to problem solve on how we can make those things work better. What can we do to improve them in the next day or so that's going to actually, cascade right out onto the line, onto the delivery room floor.
Yeah.
How can we make that work? So that happens at least once a week. If there's a necessity for it beyond a week, beyond the weekly check-in, we'll do that. But then we just adjust. So, for example, last year, halfway through the season, we were monitoring our application levels. And then halfway through the season, we realized that we were still going to need yet another bump in groceries that we'd ordered. So, middle of November, we're ordering more groceries to be able to have that available to folks who needed it. It still wasn't enough, but there comes a point where you sort of cross that point of no return and you cannot do anything because our timeline is so finite.
Yes.
But again, to me, it's always about just reviewing, assessing, and problem solving as you go along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is fascinating when you make that commitment to those weekly times together. What a difference it can really make, and not letting anything take them away from you. And it's the same thing as that. I start off with that inclusion, about that concept of like that continuous reminder about how we approach each other and what we do. Those weekly check-ins also continue to build on that inclusion that we started talking about at the beginning of our time together.
Well, and there's no team member that isn't too busy to be able to take half an hour to do an update. And I think that's the big piece. It's peeling people away when they feel they really need to be hands-on.
Yeah.
We're not taking you away for the day. We're just taking you away for a half an hour check-in, right?
Mm-hmm. But it's really, really interesting because the other day I was volunteering somewhere, and the one person who's in charge of everything somehow got themselves so involved in an activity that we ended up having a big gap, So what is a trick for you as a leader that allows you to sort of not get stuck in the weeds? What's some tricks that you do? Because that's really what a lot of what we're talking about too.
I try to not take everything on myself. If it belongs to the warehouse team lead, then I need to leave it with him because he's the one who's responsible for coming to me with it. I shouldn't taking everything and then telling them the answers. That's the wrong process. It's him doing the work and then telling me if there's a concern that he has. So and that was something that, again, over the last couple of years, I myself have learned is these folks have the expertise and the knowledge. Don't take their job away from them. Give them the ability to do that and come to you when they need to. And that to me is the best way to not get stuck in the weeds, because people, they're there for a reason.
Yes,
and give them the ability to do their job, and they'll do it well.
Yeah, they will. And from the people that are volunteering there, if they show up and there's nothing for them to do, they likely won't come back, right?
Right. And that is a huge thing for us, because we ebb and flow a lot over the course of the season. Just it depends. Not every day at every time is going to be the same activity in the warehouse, but it's just making sure that there is something else. If somebody does find themselves idle, that we can reassign them to a different area.
Yeah. And once again, when we're not in the weeds, we can do that, right? Because you can sort of see things or feel something in the room, and then you can actually move from there and suggest or put the right person into action to look after it, right? Not always you, but the right person.
And you get folks, I look at our volunteer coordinator. She's an excellent set of eyes that can definitely see if somebody's not busy. Okay, here's something else we can get you to do. So, because we don't ever want someone to walk away thinking that they haven't contributed. That's a recipe for disaster when it comes to volunteer recruitment.
It is very much, I don't think people realize that all the time. I think
Yep.
people think it's like, oh, it's not so busy, they'll be okay. I'm like, that's not why they came to volunteer.
Right.
And it is that community. So if you think about the topic that we have,
Mhm.
what direction, I'll put on my hat here of just asking you that question. What direction do you think we should go in? Creativity, collaboration, and community. What direction do you think we should go in now?
I think community is always the best environment. Like, I mean, to me, there's so much that you can talk on community,
Yeah.
and just how community plays such a big part in the nonprofit sector here in the city. As you know, Donna, I mean, we talk about it all the time that Winnipeggers, Manitobans are the biggest volunteers right across Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and that is why so many organizations are able to thrive in this environment, because people come forward. Even when you have that little bit of time, you step forward and commit it to an organization that needs it.
Yes. And it's that stepping up, right? So from how is it that when we're in that space, how is it that we can get people to step up with ideas, how we can get them to step up? Also, when we're out in the community, that's also when we see things that we're like, oh, I could use that in my group. And so
Right.
sometimes we get busy, right? We get so, it's myself included, sometimes I can get very grassroots, but then I miss those opportunities to learn from other people. So to your fellow not-for-profit team,
Yeah.
what do we say about the importance of getting out of our own space so we can learn?
I think it's huge. It gives you a perspective on what's going on within other organizations and with other individuals. So you
Yeah.
can understand better what people's interests are, and how they're identifying with the organizations that they're supporting. It's, over the last couple of years, I keep saying that's a recurring theme.
It's
But
true though.
it's true. Your eyes become open a lot more to what's going on within the community when you make a point of exploring it and getting to know things. I also find that just, you look at millennials and just the way that they engage with community is such a significantly different step from how I've seen Gen X and other generations sort of go through it. So it's trying to meet them where they are, and encourage them to come to you when the time comes that they feel interested in committing some of their time. So those pieces, and we've done some volunteer sort of recruitment things with Volunteer Manitoba, which have been fantastic. We continue to do those, but it's really sort of learning who that audience is, and getting a little bit more comfortable with being in their environment, not just in ours.
Yeah, the thing that pops in my head is that if I'm sitting there now and I want to find a way to get involved, I almost want to, because there's so many QR codes now, right? I almost want to be able to click QR code with my phone, be able to click there, say I want, your criteria for selection, right, of a family, and then I want to be able to pick. I actually don't want someone actually having to wait for them to get back to me. I want that speed. So, taking those ideas, those continuous ideas to the table, like how do you process and sort all the different ideas that come to you?
We typically have a lot of organizations that'll come and approach me directly and sort of throw something out there and see, what the thoughts are. To me, at this point, and there's no bad idea. It's just fleshing it out a little bit to see what the realities of that look like. And also, as my volunteer coordinator, is quick to always remind me not to expend more energy than we are creating on the other end, which is a big one, because I am sort of that person who will always agree to just about anything, but I've learned to take a step back.
Cool.
And really assess what the impacts are to how our business works first and foremost, because we got to keep the clients our primary, and that's our first line of sight. Anything beyond that, we just need to see if it's going to be if it's going to help us down the road. And if that is, so we sort of go through that checklist, and if that's the case, then it's a green light to go forward. But just making sure we have the capacity to do so, that's a huge thing.
So it's a bunch of steps in there that you sort of just
right?
glossed over, right? You just glossed over. So, what is the criteria of what we consider? How would we rate our things?
Right. Yeah.
The fact that you have a member of your team that said something to you and you listen to it, even though you
Yeah.
might be like, let's just try, right? If you're a try person, just say yes person, which
Yes.
I just want people to hear though, like there's some real important steps in there. Is one is you make yourself open. So I'd love to hear ideas. So as an executive director, you talked about the fact that you're already approachable. You've used that language. And so approachable to your team, but also approachable to the community.
Absolutely. During the off season, which our off season is a fairly long one, my phone is always on and I take calls from community members, whether they be donating items or they have an idea, perhaps they want to do something in the off season. Sometimes that's a little bit more self-governed than anything because we just don't have the capacity to help in a big way.
Yeah.
But again, it's really just assessing what their interests are and how we can better accommodate them and support them properly. So, that phone never stops ringing. It comes about, once a week or so. I hear from a member of the community who's got a great idea and try and work with them on it. And, a lot, I'll tell you that, my basement is full of donations because I will keep taking those and we'll make sure.
Yeah, so you got to take, that's right, because it's not just but that's the same thing that you talked about. You said that you speak to the mountaintops, right? Like when you'll you'll go to the top of a mountain and talk about your organization. Can you tell me how important that is to how important that is to what we're talking about today?
I don't think that enough can be said about trying to get your message across. I will use an example. A number of years ago, before I actually came into this role, I was working with an individual. And again, I'd been volunteering for the cheer board for a long time. So I was working with a colleague and he said to me, so what's this cheer board thing about anyway? And it took me back. I thought anybody from, age 5 to 85 knew everything there was to know about the cheer board, and recognizing that that wasn't truly the case and that somebody in my own sort of my own age group wasn't familiar with us, it made me realize that we needed to help educate folks on what we do, and any opportunity that we had to do that was a good one. So I will go in front of organizations, whether it be with newcomers or whether it be sometimes we get some of our social agencies who request us to come and talk to them and just sort of inform about how the cheer board works, so we can their clients can better understand and better receive support from us. We'll take any opportunity we can to just familiarize individuals and organizations with who we are, and that helps us in the long run, but it also helps the community really decide whether they want to be a part of what we do.
Well, you make it sound easy. But how like when we start to think about it though, like when we start thinking about, adjust our goals and behaviors, adaptability, right? Like we talked today, we're talking about creativity and innovation, but it's that idea, and you've used the word adaptable, but it's adjusting our goals and behavior. Like how do you adjust yourself to meet the needs that are coming in at that time?
During the busy season for us is obviously November and December, and a lot of different needs and inquiries come in during that period of time. So we try and assess them based on what the scope of them looks like, and how we're going to have to pull away from what we're currently doing. And if it's sort of weighted, if it has the value in it to be able to support our clients, then it's worthwhile taking a step back and understanding how we can integrate it into our process. If it's bigger than that, it's something that we really have to sort of put on the shelf and identify as next year's priority. So it depends on what's coming through. Again, Donna, to be honest with you, sometimes they come at light speed, and it's a lot of suggestions, and people have the best of intentions with those suggestions. They really do. They want us to be better. They want us to be absolutely better. And so it's just recognizing what that looks like and how it impacts us if we're in the heat of things at that time. If we're not, we have the ability to adjust as we go. But beforehand, we really, or like in the midst of our campaign season, then we really have to assess what, how much is it going to impact what we're doing at this particular moment?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You started talking earlier on about like the question about how to create the best space, and some of it might even come like prepping your employees for all those examples and suggestions that volunteers are going to have, and how they can separate. Like, do you talk about the value of boundaries? Does that make sense? Like when I went to go deliver a hamper one time, someone wanted to take a picture, and I said, no,
Yeah.
no, thank you. Like that was that was a boundary crossing, right? Because
Sure.
wasn't me, it was them. I said, no, I'm not. So I like that boundary. But do you talk about boundaries with your staff to the volunteers that are coming in?
Definitely. Our staff have a lot of, they're empaths. They want to be there to help.
Yeah.
And that always is a big challenge because we have to recognize our own boundaries and how far we're willing to go. Yes. And so I even have our team, my core team of staff, some of them at the beginning were insisting that they needed to be there 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And it was telling them that, no, you have to have boundaries. You cannot be there that length of time. You can be as passionate rather about this organization as you want to be. But if you're exhausted, you're not doing yourself or the organization any good. So creating boundaries for them was a huge piece. And we continue to work on that because some of them are a little bit more stubborn than others. But again, it's also, as I keep telling them, it's not just about you and your commitment, but it's about what our other volunteers and folks who might want to step into those leadership roles see. And that can be a scary environment if you all of a sudden, if the role that you would like to take on looks like it's a 85-hour-a-week job, that may not be something that you really want to step into, and it scares people away. So we're able to, set some confines for our own people, then it's a lot more comfortable of a space for other people to aspire to.
Yeah, that is because those people are individuals that go home and have their own space, family, and communities on top of the work they're doing here. And it is really an interesting thing for you to talk about, especially in the not-for-profit, where people say like, I give a lot. Do you know what I mean? They want to give, and creating an environment and culture where you can actually do that and it be appreciated. I hope people hear that. Like, it's what I hear you saying is you appreciate people who can create these boundaries.
I appreciate when people create the boundaries. I'd rather they do it than I do it for them.
Yeah.
But it also, it helps us look to that next generation of team members that are going to come forward and manage their expectations, because at the end of the day, this organization is important, but people have lives and we have to balance those accordingly. So that's essential.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you bringing that up from that boundaries perspective. I don't know you all that well. We've met a couple of times, but from our time together today, I hear a person who's both data and community connected. And so maybe, pardon me?
I try to be
data and community. That's all. Yeah, no, that's what I hear coming through is like, everyone will take their own messaging. I won't know what someone else's messaging will be from our time together today.
Sure.
But for me, I've got that's a thread I've heard. I won't, like I said, I won't decide for others, but a thread for me is, so how do you hold that space and kind of like, what are some thoughts on that and how we can be successful about, let's talk about that adaptability and that creativity. How do we just create that? Like, what do we do with that?
I think, as an executive director, you always wear many different hats. And sometimes, at the end of the year, as I said, when we're pulling data, I'm looking at that, trying to better understand our clients. And that helps us adjust to who we are as an organization when we know the majority of who we're supporting and how we're supporting them. So the data sort of starts to build the shape of what the coming year looks like.
Yeah.
But the creativity comes from, sitting down with the people who help make this organization, this big chugging organization, work every year, and saying, here's the challenge that we have. What's the opportunity we have to succeed this year, and see what comes of it. Everybody has a perspective when they're watching the season make its way through. and they take notes. They have mental thoughts about, what they could see to improve down the road. And so when you actually have that chance to regroup and start forming those conversations around what can we do better this year, how can we make improvements, a lot of thoughts come to the forefront, and we can make those into realities as long as we've got some time to sort of process them and form a plan around them. So I think that's what we've always tried to do, is just take the ideas that people have and
Yeah.
see how they work best for this organization. And that's always going to be a recipe for success. But it really does have to start with the data. So because we want to make sure when we survey our recipients, we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for them, because if we're not, then we're missing the boat entirely. And because there's 20,000 plus of them out there, those are families, those aren't just individuals.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, how can, servicing them is the key, but how we do that is the creative piece.
Yeah, no, I love hearing that. I love when people, I mean, I personally love when we go and we say, like, let's talk to the people who are actually using our stuff. What's it like for them to experience our service versus this is what we're offering? And that approach that I've heard you take really always just creates a space of collaboration, right? Community. And you have to be creative because you're going to hear things you never thought about. Like, that's what you're probably hoping for, right? I'm hoping to hear things I've never thought about.
Absolutely. And being out on the floor, I definitely myself try and be out on the floor as much as possible, just that if someone did want to talk, that I'm there to have that conversation with. It's important that they see people, I frankly, I think I talk to the media a lot, sometimes too much, but what that does is people see me, and so that when I'm in the warehouse, they're able to identify me. And if they've got a concern, I want them to come and talk about it. It's important, because if it's bothering them that much, then there needs to be a conversation held around it.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for being approachable and for coming on here and finding just to share what you know and ideas within your organization, which I know strategies that I heard many of them that other people can use as well, right? We all want
Yes,
everyone to succeed. There's the world of abundance, not lack of, right?
that's right.
There's lots for us to go around and to share. So I want to thank you very much, Shawna, to being here today. We hope you've enjoyed your time on Success Skills Unwrapped webinar, and hope others have enjoyed their time listening to us as well. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks so much, Donna.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.